Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining this information gathering session. I know it's later in the afternoon over in the UK, Gavin, so thank you for making time. But thank you to Genevieve, James, and Gavin all for being here to help the committee out today. I won't take too long here so we can maximize our time for discussion, but just want to go over a few housekeeping items really quickly. First, I know we've all been on Zoom for years at this point, but just some quick Zoom etiquette. Let's please use the raised hand functions today and use the mute button when you're not speaking to help with any limiting any distractions. And then if at all possible, please keep your camera on for open discussion to help facilitate more of that community feel. We will be recording this meeting primarily for internal use, so those on the committee who are unable to make it today are able to view the recording and still partake in gathering all of the information that is shared here today. And then at the academies, we are committed to fostering a professional, respectful, inclusive environment where all participants can participate fully in an atmosphere that is free of harassment and discrimination. So all of that to say, let's please just be respectful of one another. And if there is anything that makes you feel uncomfortable today, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the Academy's staff on the line. And just finally, thank you to the other Academy staff on the line. So that's myself and Jonathan Tucker today. And then the other two staff who helped in planning these meetings, Noelle Walters and Brian Ruff. We're very appreciative to have had them as part of this information gathering session. And with that, I will hand it over to our committee co-chairs, Rod Eggert and Carol Frost, to lead us through the remainder of this discussion.
Well, good morning. I'm Rod Eggert. I'm a mineral economist at Colorado School of Mines. I know Gavin and have interacted with him for many years. So Gavin, thank you for joining us. Genevieve and James, I don't believe I've met you, but again, thank you very much for joining us. As I think or hope you know, the purpose of this National Academies Committee is to review and evaluate the Mineral Resources Program at the U.S. Geological Survey, and more specifically to help them optimize their portfolio of activities. And so that includes assessing what they're doing now relative to the current needs of the nation, but also thinking forward and asking what are the emerging national needs in the area of mineral resources that the Mineral Resources Program should plan around and engage appropriately in to serve the nation. I think we will. What I'd suggest is that we go around the room and introduce ourselves. Then we'll give each of our guests a few minutes to introduce themselves and what they do, and based on what they know, how what they do or their organization does compares with similarities, differences with the Mineral Resources Program at the U.S. Geological Survey. So again, I'm Rod Eggert, Colorado School of Mines. My co-chair, Carol Frost. Carol.
I'm Carol Frost, and it is an honor to co-chair this committee, and I'm very grateful to you for taking time with us. I'm a professor emerita at the University of Wyoming, a petrologist and isotope geochemist, and I also have the honor to be on your BGS board, Gavin.
All right, going around my screen, Bob Bodner.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Bodner. I'm a geochemist, petrologist, economic geologist, and I'm a faculty member at Virginia Tech.
Nelia.
Hi, my name is Nelia Dunbar. I'm a geochemist, petrologist, volcanologist by training, and I am the Emerita State Geologist of New Mexico.
Cecilia.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Cecilia Lasso-Scott. I'm an environmental geochemist. I used to work as a mine waste geochemist for Rio Tinto in Australia, and recently I moved to the US and I work for a company that remines mine tailings. Thank you.
Rachel.
Awesome. My name is Rachel Hampton, and I'm an exploration geologist looking for lithium all over the world, including in the US with cobalt metals. But I used to work with Lithium Americas, so kind of the entire lithium space from pegmatites to brines is of interest. But I'm really excited to hear from you guys today and your work and coordination with the USGS. So thanks again for chatting with us today.
Richard.
Yes, I'm Richard Smith, and I'm a applied geophysicist with experience in airborne geophysics, and I'm a faculty member at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Canada.
Karen.
Sorry, I wasn't ready. I'm Karen Olson-Hall. I'm at Cornell University, and my background is economic geology, and I work in geometallurgy, geomet type of applications. Thank you.
Tom.
Good morning. I'm Tom Gradle. I'm a retired faculty member from Yale University. My specialty is industrial ecology, and particularly the techniques and approaches to defining what makes a critical material critical and what might make another material not critical. And I'm interested in the discussion today. Thank you.
And before we turn it over to our guests, Morgan and Jonathan, you didn't have a chance to introduce yourselves. So would you like to briefly introduce yourselves? Morgan.
Sure. Go ahead.
Or Jonathan.
All right. Jonathan Tucker, a program officer at the National Academies, geochemist and volcanologist by training, but very happy to be working on this project and learning a lot about mineral resources.
Hi, I'm Morgan Disbromans. I'm also a program officer at the Academy's structural geologist, glaciologist by training, but have been very excited to work on this project with this wonderful committee and Jonathan.
All right. Well, with that, I suggest we move into the next part of the agenda, and that is for our three guests to introduce themselves and begin the discussion by perhaps comparing and contrasting what they and their organizations do compared to what they know about, at least, the activities of the Mineral Resources Program at the U.S. Geological Survey. Genevieve, would you like to begin? And I'll go Genevieve, James, and Gavin, just so you can be thinking, planning.
Thank you so much for this invitation. My name is Genevieve Marquis, and I'm the Executive Director at the Geological Survey of Canada, and I'm the Executive Director in charge of the Mineral Geoscience Research Agenda for the federal government in Canada, and in particular, the research on critical minerals. James, over to you.
Hi, James Ickers, Senior Policy Advisor at the Central Division of the Geological Survey of Canada, reporting to Genevieve. I also handle a lot of the international cooperation on behalf of the Geological Survey of Canada. Lots of work with USGS, lots of preliminary work continentally as well, including Mexico.
Yeah, g'day. I'm Gavin. I moved, I guess, from Australia late last year to join the British Geological Survey, and my role here is Director of the Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre. And so our role is very much focused on providing advice and the research work that underpins policy for the UK government. But more broadly, I guess there's both a minerals team within BGS that does work both within the UK and internationally, and then we also have an international team. And often we find that countries, whether it's different parts of Africa and so on, get really excited about their mineral resources, and then they realize that they need to deal with either water issues or natural hazards sometimes, and other things that all sit around the issues that relate to mining. So there's a lot of different aspects. So some of those I can talk about well, and I guess in my previous work I've done a lot of work, including with Tom Gradle there, looking at how we quantify a lot of the critical metals and things like that. And so looking at that from a mining point of view. So, yeah, happy to be involved. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And if I might quickly go around to each of the three of you again and maybe ask a variant of just introduce yourselves, and that is, what do you think you do better than the U.S. Geological Survey? And then there's an obvious reverse to that question as well, but let's think about it this way to begin with.
Did you want to go first, Genevieve?
Oh, you can go first and I'll go next.
No worries. In some ways, I think, the BGS, I guess, is one of the only other groups out there that's been doing a lot of our world mineral statistics for almost as long as the USGS. So it's something I think we'd probably do at least equally, and there's some aspects to what the USGS do that is different to ours. There's some aspects that we don't have, for example. So, so I think the focus on supporting and capacity building in a lot of different countries, that's something that we've been doing for almost since the start of BGS, and given BGS is almost 200 years old now. So certainly I think that's probably something I think we certainly do very, very well.
Okay. Genevieve?
Yes, well, first we have a lot of admiration for USGS for many facets of the geoscience. At the Geological Survey of Canada, our primary focus is the science excellence, and as a lead mining nation, our target is to attract investors in Canada in the mining industry. So that might be a slightly different from USGS endeavor to protect the global supply chain and access the minerals that are considered critical. So we have different targets. So it's difficult to compare exactly surveys for surveys, who we are and what we're doing best, because we have different targets. So given the fact that one of our targets is to attract investors in the mining industry in Canada as a lead mining nation, so one thing I believe that is really profoundly attractive for USGS when we're looking at Canada, it's our capacity for data analytics using artificial intelligence and deep learning for prospectivity modeling. I know that a lot of work is being done in the US to support those efforts, but for different targets. So in Canada, we're not excellent in organizing the methodology on criticality, for instance, or organizing the key stakeholders on various aspects of the critical minerals. But for the research on critical minerals in terms of data analytics and artificial intelligence, I think we're a smaller survey, obviously, but we do offer a lot of capacity. And we really appreciate working with USGS on that front. Especially, I can anticipate your second question, what USGS is doing better than us. I have other ideas, but anyways, I'll stop for now.
Thank you, Genevieve. James, anything to add to that?
What Genevieve said. But I'll say as well that with the definition of our new critical minerals program at the Geological Survey of Canada, we have a central focus on environmental, social, and governance as core to our new research programs, and we aim to be a world leader in that domain. I do think as well, with the history of the Geological Survey of Canada since 1842, it precedes Confederation in 1867. It's the oldest science organization in Canada. With that carries a lot of legacy, and we have a lot of international geological surveys wanting to cooperate with us.
Well, very good. I'd like to now flip the table and ask the committee members to get in line to ask their questions. I might begin by returning to Gavin. And you mentioned that your group, the Minerals Intelligence Center, does some things, some different things than what the National Minerals Information Center does at USGS. And you mentioned capacity building, but could you build upon the, what do you do that's similar to National Minerals Information Center, and what things do you do that they don't do?
Yeah, and I guess I have to distinguish between what my centre does, which is the Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre, and so, or CMIC as we call it, is purely set up to advise the UK government. So if you're looking at other parts of BGS, both the minerals team and then the international team, they do a lot of work internationally, and that's working with different geological surveys or their equivalents. So at the moment, we've got people that have recently been to Angola or Guinea, Zimbabwe, Zambia, the various Central Asian sort of republics and so on as well. And so I think, and that's been something, I mean, I think James was just mentioning that the GSC was set up in 1842, and that was by us. So same as it was the BGS that set up the surveys back in my former country of Australia. So I think that capacity building and actually helping surveys achieve their own goals as well, that's something that I think has always been very important to BGS for a very, very long time. So that's something I think those teams, those parts of BGS, and certainly some of us get involved with those projects, but that's sort of the main things I guess I was just trying to sort of highlight there, I guess. So.
All right, thank you. I see we now have a queue, and I'll start with Rachel and then go Cecilia, Richard, and Bob. So Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I guess I have a pretty quick follow-up to sort of the introductory remarks, and that is really about the data side of things. Because I think Canada, I know I've worked with a lot of the data in Canada, and the portals are great, and the data is very accessible. And so I was just wondering sort of how you've organized that, both in terms of data storage, and do you have kind of a specific team set up that's doing data sharing, data analytics, or is that something that your research scientists are expected to do, or how have you organized sort of that data storage and data sharing? Yeah.
In Canada, that's a very high priority at the Geological Survey of Canada. So a couple of years ago, I set up a new team called the Digital Geoscience team, in charge of data management and data supporting the data analytics that is being done by the research scientists. And so of course we have the data catalog, which is huge. And one thing that we have in terms of special asset, not only for the GSC in Canada, but for the geological surveys generally in the world, one super big asset that we have is we have a lot of data in terms of volume. So the volume is a very important element, but the second element that is really precious is the vast majority of our data is open access. So we're the biggest supplier of open data sets in the federal government. And that is a real privilege to be in that situation. And why it's such an important piece, it's because this is really unlocking or opening the capacity for collaboration with specialized organization in artificial intelligence and deep learning. The minute the data is protected, it's becoming extremely difficult for other groups. So in the case of the Geological Survey of Canada, and I assume the vast majority of the surveys in the world, we have a lot of data and the data is open. So that's two key elements that are speeding up our capacity for data analytics. And we're really well positioned in Canada with other academic institutions specialized in deep learning. And we have, for many years, we have profound collaboration with them. And now they're attracting their talent, recruiting their talent to specialize in geoscience and data and the use of geoscience data sets for conducting their research in AI. So those are a couple of points that are really particular. It's not the case in other spheres or other themes of research in artificial intelligence that can be really hard because of the volume of the data. You also mentioned one element is about the data storage. The data storage is not an issue anymore. I know it's been an issue for a long, long time, but I never get one single scientist who will complain about data storage. We move because obviously all the data is in the open, but we move to a model where it's cloud first. So we have a really strong cloud adoption and cloud infrastructure at the Geological Survey of Canada. And in fact, we have the highest rate of adoption for cloud technology at the GSC compared to the rest of the federal government in Canada. So the cloud strategy is really profound. The minute we're getting a new staff or new research scientist, as part of the onboarding, it's their unlimited access to cloud. So that's really making a big difference for, playing with the data and data storage. So we have a team inside the GSC because the Geological Survey of Canada is well nested in the Department of Natural Resources, but we have our team at the GSC in charge of the cloud infrastructure and cloud access and supporting the scientists in person, side by side with the scientists.
There we go. I think certainly BGS, we have a team that's a digital team, and that also includes a strong focus on AI and machine learning. So as we always like to claim, we're one of the world's oldest surveys, probably similar to the USGS in age, I guess. But and that means we've got a huge legacy of data, and some of that, sometimes the data sets are actually really old. So part of that is we have an active project at the moment where we've got a lot of our older reports relating to, say, mineral exploration and geochemistry and so on that have been scanned in, and so now they're being processed through AI to see what we can learn from that. So it's so I think in general, I think as Genevieve was saying as well, like BGS, we have a policy that our data should be public. Right. And there's certainly various things that we do, and there's some stuff that's probably more unique to BGS in terms of, say, surface water and groundwater that sometimes other geological surveys don't do, but I know USGS does have some focus in those areas as well. So I think there's certainly other data sets that we have, and there's services around that. Like one of the services relates to sort of more the land use planning and construction, and so looking at some of the geological risks around construction. So there's some of those services that our data certainly supports. So but in terms of sort of mineral resources, a lot of that comes back to, I suppose, the legacy data that we have and making sure that that's available. Or sometimes, as we do with our international work, is actually helping to build the capacity in places like Zambia or elsewhere. So where they've got a lot of legacy data and how to get that scanned in, how to build that digital architecture so that all of that history of science basically can actually be accessed and used for modern needs.
Perhaps before we go on to Cecilia, I could just ask a follow-up. We've heard from the USGS about the challenges of getting the data that's being acquired at such a high rate, getting it posted openly in a timely manner. Do either of you have issues like that?
Yeah, we have this issue as well. Mainly because the scientists, when they're collecting the information, it's not that they don't have the capacity to release the data right away, but the data that they're collecting, they want to validate if it's accurate, if they have the right tag, if they have the right attribute, if it's well curated, if it's well organized. So it's one thing to collect the data, but the release of the data comes with a lot of disclaimers because in many instances, it comes with some interpretation of the data. So the value added, the interpretation of the data, and making sure that the data is as per the expectation requires some time. And obviously we have some legacy, and not all data can be disseminated as we collect it.
Yeah, just to quickly add there, very similar for us too, and that's sort of why over recent times there's been a lot more effort put into planning around all those issues that Genevieve's just raised to make sure that we're looking at quality control, the sort of quality assurance and so on, to make sure that the data sets are ready to go out, and when they're ready to get published, they've actually had those sort of checks and the quality's there. And all of that sort of metadata and everything else is there. So that's certainly part of the infrastructure and the process. And it means a lot more work up front. I suppose the only other issue is just sometimes capacity, making sure we've got some of the right people and the right expertise. And given the broad interest in AI, making sure that we're attracting people into BGS to work in that space as well, compared to everywhere else that people with AI expertise could work. So that can sometimes be an issue. And that's, I suppose, not just an issue in AI, that's an issue across the board, whether it's mineral resources and other things in geosciences too.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's move on to Cecilia.
Hi, I'd like to follow up on James' remarks as well and see if he can elaborate a little bit more on the ESG work that he said that they're doing there. I'll be very interested to hear what exactly that work entails and what they're doing in that space.
Thanks for that. It was a central goal of our recent Critical Minerals Geoscience and Data program that was launched just a year and a half ago, and it ties to the previous work that was done, previous programs at the Geological Survey of Canada, where we have the goal of responsible resource development over the years, but we wanted to up that kind of a goal to include data layers to ensure that, well, there's one of our scientists, Christopher Lawley, where he's well known for this kind of work, where he's adding these data layers to ensure that areas of high potential mineral prospectivity are coincided geographically with low probability of effects on the environment, on communities, particularly Indigenous communities in Canada, as well as environmental impacts. So it's targeting with responsibilities, another way to put it. So that's something that we're really making quite a lot of progress. And I can put a link into the chat with some of Chris Lawley's work on this topic. But once again, it's a central theme of our critical minerals program, and more and more of the new internal research must have elements of ESG in that. Perhaps Genevieve might add to that as well.
Yes, thank you, James. So just to complement what James mentioned, our target is to attract investors and going faster in de-risking mineral exploration. So for that purpose, when we were listening to the industry, they were saying that ESG is a main challenge, is a very important challenge. So instead of applying the ESG layers at the end when they're ready to do mineral exploration, we decided to put the ESG information right at the beginning of the mineral prospectivity modeling. And so it's not only one scientist, it's all the scientists working on the Critical Minerals Geoscience and Data program. When they submit a project proposal, they have to explain how their research project will contribute to ESG layers. And then we are now in the situation where we're doing prospectivity modeling at national scales for various commodities, and we're adding, we have a methodology adding many layers of georeference information on ESG. So those layers are the top layers as promoted by the federal government in Canada. And of course, it doesn't replace the local knowledge for ESG or a local particularity for ESG and in a special community, but it's certainly providing a significant information for the mining companies to make the right decision for investing and de-risking mineral exploration in Canada.
Thank you for the link, James. Cecilia, do you have any follow-ups?
Sorry, no, that was great. Thank you.
All right, let's move to Richard.
Yes, thanks. I have a question that maybe each of you could address briefly, and this is about geoscience capacity. So the USGS has acknowledged that there's a problem for them in the United States with not a lot of geoscientists being trained and working in their industry. So they are thinking of ways of building up capacity, which one of the things they're talking about is internships. And another thing is trying to revitalize some of the education programs that have reduced over the years. So can you talk a little bit about that, but also about the geophysical aspect, which is the ability to get geophysical contractors to acquire data? So the USGS right now, they're acquiring gravity and radiometrics data, and they're using Canadian contractors. There are no American contractors to do that. And I know that the BGS had a little experiment a few years back where they bought a Finnish geophysical system and used that for a number of years. So they had internal capability, and the GSC had their own aircraft about 30 years ago. So maybe can you talk about how it is you encourage students to come into the industry and how you encourage capacity to be built in your jurisdictions for geophysical acquisition?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here. It's difficult, and I know from experience in Australia as well as here in the UK, there is a significant downturn in students going through geoscience programs of all types. So it's a challenge, and I think I don't think it's going to be solved by one sort of approach alone. I think it's a sort of almost very Napoleonic, like lots of different strands all happening all at once. So and it's not something we have a direct mandate to do with at BGS per se, but certainly some of our staff are involved, whether it's some of the education programs and things like that. So providing materials to try and attract students from high school into sort of geoscience in university, and also just supporting some of the different professional associations or organizations that are involved in that space as well. So exactly what the real solution is to that, I don't know. It's a really difficult one, and it's something that I think everyone is grappling with. So at the time we need more people focused in this area is the time we're getting less. So it's a real problem. In terms of geophysics, I know we're actively trying to sort of actually update a lot of that for the UK, but it's hard to get the sort of funding for that. The BGS itself, we don't have any in-house capacity anymore, as far as I know. That the technology and the sort of infrastructure we used to have for that was from many years ago. All right, so if assuming we could get something done in the UK, and there have been geophysical surveys done of Northern Ireland and the sort of the southwest, so the Talus and the Talus Southwest programs, but there's still many parts of the UK that could benefit from a modern, geophysics sort of survey. So, and so we would have to go to externally to that. Now, I believe there are groups that are UK based that could do that. But exactly the level of detail, I guess that's sort of a lot of speculation for the future. But at the moment, I guess what we're focused on is that the actual the detailed technical work and the actual survey itself would be done externally, but BGS would be the host for all of that data. And again, so our infrastructure around data and digital and being that sort of the repository would be our key role, as well as overseeing the quality control processes and the everything else as part of a program like that. So yeah, we remain hopeful, I guess, that we'll be able to get that happening in the near future. But it's but certainly on the geoscience education, it's a hard one, and I don't have a great answer for that. Sorry, I wish we all did, but it's a really difficult one.
I can share my experience from the Geological Survey of Canada in terms of talent, and specifically about the geoscience and geophysical talent and recruitment campaign. So 2 years ago, when we knew that we were going to be approved for the critical minerals research program, we initiated a very vast recruitment campaign for all type of geoscience required for the support of critical minerals research, including geophysicists. During that campaign, at the launch of that campaign, we set really clear principle for EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the Geological Survey of Canada is an organization that exists for almost 2 centuries, but it was typically like male scientists. The majority of the workforce were male scientists. But with this recruitment campaign, we really changed the path. And less than a year ago, we met all our target to hire more females in our EDI capacity. I engage a lot with USGS because they were like, and also Australia when I was doing this recruitment campaign, and we were exchanging on best practices. One thing to note is that in our case, and in particular for geophysicists, we've done a lot of recruitment, yes, in Canada. The vast majority was in Canada, but we're recruited talent internationally as well. And I'm under the impression with my interaction and formal interaction with USGS that is not that easy for USGS to attract talent from international people. In my case, so we launched a campaign, and if we couldn't find the right candidate in Canada, that was really easy to switch to the international candidates. And for instance, at one point, our country, our nation has been called to support Ukraine. And I was like, what can I do in my position to support Ukraine? Well, I attracted and I hired many talent from the Ukraine Geological Survey because they were refugees. So I am hosting talent, and particular talent in geophysics from Ukraine. And same for other nation where they were having like kind of refugees. Iran, we have a lot of Iranian refugees in Canada. Canada typically, and USA as well. We are hosting a lot of refugees. So, and some of them are really highly qualified staff. So that was one of my strategy to recruit in those very highly qualified refugee, and also attract international talent all over the world. So that made a difference. And it's on the floor right now. We can see it's really international. There are people from all over the world, and once they get their security clearance and they can get their capacity to work in Canada, they're welcome to join the team. So that was a couple of strategies we opted for the recruitment in critical minerals.
Okay, James, do you have anything to add?
I'll just add that in terms of student hiring, overall, the government of Canada has legacy programs related to hiring students, and particularly science-based organizations. I'll put a couple more links in the chat that we rely a lot on what's called a research affiliate program, as well as the NSERC, I never remember the acronym, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. These might provide some useful information for your purposes. And I'll also add just my own sentiment in terms of what I've witnessed in the hiring process over the last couple of years, that it's really nice to see the young talent that we've recruited. And you know what? A lot of them have expressed their joy of becoming an employee of the Geological Survey of Canada. We have a really nice legacy and it's nice to hear that these young folks are really attracted to an organization like ours. So I'll add those links.
Okay, so maybe I could just ask a follow-up question on the same line. So as far as the geophysical capacity is concerned, back in the 1980s, there were about 4 different airborne geophysical contractors, all based out of Ottawa. And the reason why they were based there was because the Canadian government was giving out so much work that they could, base themselves there and interact with the GSC. So the GSC really built the capacity for airborne geophysics in Canada, I think. And they did that through sustained funding over a long period of time. So this gets to the point of sustained funding. Does the GSC know that they're always going to have a certain amount of money available for geophysics every year? And so they can use that money, because in a year when the exploration industry is down, prices drop, the GSC can get surveys quite cheaply. So it sort of pays to do that. What's the current funding timelines, I guess? Do you know that you're going to have geophysical acquisition budgets, X years in the future, or is it month to month?
No, it's not month to month. Like it's a very core element of the mineral geoscience program. It serves many different programs, not only the mineral geoscience. So, and in fact, what you're saying in terms of the possibility option for the governance, we faced that situation in 2018. At one point, when I was leading the airborne geophysical team, we were in a situation where we were not as well funded as we are today, and we were considering options. What could we do to reduce our capacity? Can we just rely on the private industry? So one question that was on the table, or scenario that was on the table in 2018, is, can we say, okay, we don't do airborne geophysics and we only deal with procurement and have contract instead of having our some capacity, geophysical capacity for research and in airborne geophysics in-house. So we had a long debate, because some people consider internally that, hey, in fact, it's only a contract, so we can only deal with procurement and send our requirement to the private industry. But after a lot of discussion, we realized that no, it's really core. It's really important to keep the in-house capacity. The private industry doesn't replace what the GSC is offering. So we have a lot of interaction with the airborne geophysical firms in Ottawa, but that's not something that a private industry can do. Like, it's the role of the federal government for the calibration, for the validation, for the data processing. So for many facets of the business of airborne geophysical research, it's not being replaced by the private industry. We need to keep the research in-house. I know that the Earth MRI is a really big program in the US, and I know that you're using a lot of the Canadian capacity to conduct Earth MRI. This Canadian capacity is also the result of this interaction with the federal research scientists and the firms who are offering those services, in order to supply or provide the state-of-the-art type of surveys, to make sure that it's aligned with the latest technology and software as well. It could be a long conversation, and I'll stop for now. But we had that question, like, should we say cancel? We don't do that. It's only with the private industry. And we made that self-aware decision to keep that type of research in-house.
Thank you, Genevieve. That's really enlightening. Appreciate it. Bob.
Thank you. Not exactly sure how to frame this question, but it follows somewhat on what Richard was asking. And our committee over the last 6 months has met with many groups from the USGS and visited USGS centers, and there's a general perception within the USGS that they're underappreciated. The Mineral Resources Program is underappreciated, not understood. The significance of what they do isn't appreciated. And that, of course, then translates into getting students interested in becoming geologists or economic geologists, obtaining funding from the federal government, and so on. And yesterday we met with some folks from Geosciences Australia, and I was very impressed with the program that they described for tracking success of their program, and they do it in very tangible ways. They look, for instance, if there's an uptick in a mining stock, they go to that company and ask, did information provided by our organization help you to make that discovery, and so on. And so I wanted to ask the two groups here from Canada and the UK about, in general, how do you track the success of your programs, and how do you help to build public support and government support for geosciences activities and mining in particular? Because in this country, most people have a negative opinion of mining, and that of course translates into, students not being interested in getting into mining related fields and funding from different organizations and so on. So I'll stop there and just, ask for, your response to those comments.
I'm happy to go first. I guess I'm coming from Australia. I know the way they do things very well down there, and it's very methodical. And I think it's tracking not just the sort of the cost of what GA do in terms of whether it's geophysics, whether it's geochemistry, and structural work and prospectivity analysis and all sorts of things, but then how that data is used, and then what discoveries and other things have been made. And I think when you look at the several decades of history, both of the BMR versus, and through now to what is GA, they can make those links very, very clear. All right. So whether it's discovery of bauxite, you've got various uranium deposits that have been discovered. You've got more recently a very large platinum deposit discovered just north of Perth, the likes of which Australia's never seen before. And that was discovered purely because of the data that was provided by Geoscience Australia. So, so I think they've got a really good case study of looking at that, both from a specific project or deposit, but also looking at some of the overall economic activity as well. So I think they've been able to do that really well. For the UK here, what's been done in terms of, say, looking at the Talus survey, the geophysics survey that was done in Northern Ireland, we've tracked exploration expenditure, and there's a very strong uptick that's been sustained, obviously much higher initially, but even though it has declined over time, it's still far above what it was before the Talus survey. So I think there's some good empirical evidence there that suggests that, these things add value. And now, one of the things that's different here in the UK compared to, say, Australia is, of course, we're a much smaller area, and we've got much more complex things in terms of interactions of environmental areas, like national parks, communities. So some of the uses of the data and the value that data gives rise to includes things like geothermal, groundwater, sometimes linking to things like old coal mines. Our director, one of her favourite statistics is that 25% of people actually live above a former coal mine or metal mine here in the UK, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. So I think a lot of that, whether it's the data and all of the work that goes on, a lot of that is putting all of that package together to say, well, what's the value of all of that? So certainly that's something we do. But I think that the challenge for us at the moment is to get that investment into the more modern, sort of surveys and other things as well. So that's certainly where we're very focused at the moment. But I think there's various ways to look at that. So to say that here's the money spent, what's the value that you generate? And sometimes that value is not just important for mineral exploration or things like critical minerals, but also other aspects that are often just as important to developing a mine, such as whether it's energy, it's the water, and the communities, as we've heard from Canada as well. And so that's certainly the way we look at it here.
For Canada, I would like to mention that the social perception of the mining industry, it's beyond the scope of the Geological Survey of Canada. So this is not our mandate to influence the social perception. We're focusing on science excellence and the science that will support the mineral exploration. That being said, another aspect of your question is, how do you track success of your mineral or your critical minerals research program? So one key element to track success, and the aspect on which we are audited by the federal government is our communication capacity to transfer the knowledge to the key stakeholders. And most of the time, the key stakeholders are the mining industry. So how do we do that? We do that by science article publication. That's the main communication channel for the Geological Survey of Canada. And it's also really well embedded in the staff governance, because those who are publishing article, and I believe it's very similar at USGS, this is how the research scientists, they get their promotion by their publishing regimen. So the more papers and high quality papers and citation they get, the more likely they can get promoted in their career. So that's the driver number one in terms of tracking the success. It's the science publication and engagement with the private industry. So I think this is the answer in a nutshell. The social perception of mining, I think it's different in Canada and USA. So and I'm not an expert in a social perception.
Can I just follow up on that? You say engagement with private industry. Could you be a little bit more specific? Does that mean meeting people at conferences, or does it just mean serving data to people from your cloud server?
So of course, the channel number one is the release of our science articles, fine, but engagement, like active engagement with the private industry, is very well structured. So for instance, I am the lead, I'm the chairperson of the industry advisory group, and we meet on a regular basis. It includes many key stakeholders of a network of industry in Canada, and we engage on what's the expectation for the private industry right now in terms of research, what matters the most, what are the trends. So we have an open dialogue with the private industry. Another way to engage with the private industry, like in Canada, in each provincial and territorial jurisdiction, they are organizing open houses where the different level of government, they're attending to share the latest updates on mineral geoscience. And for us, it's a very important channel to engage with the private industry if they attend those large, local conference. But we also have PDAC in Canada, where we do engage with the private industry, and this is a very formal channel as well. Finally, the cherry on top in terms of tracking the success is when the private industry are sending their testimonials to our minister. This research, this paper really had a big impact for my industry. So we track that. And we get a lot of those testimonials, direct letter from the mining industry to our minister, so we can really prove that we're making an impact with our research to de-risk mineral exploration.
And it seems from what I've heard is that in Canada and at the USGS, the success or advancement of individuals within the organizations is tied more to their what we would consider the more academic types of contributions, publications, attending conferences, whereas when we spoke with the people at Geosciences Australia, they said specifically that advancement and the way they're evaluated is very much it is much less tied to publications and the more academic aspect of mineral resources. It's more the practical end. So there are some differences here. And Gavin, in a BGS, I mean, what is the relative role of what we might think of as the more academic aspects versus the more practical aspects in terms of an individual's success and promotion?
Yeah, we try to provide pathways for people and allow people to choose their own pathway, really, right? It's not something that it has to be one or the other. I think almost half of our income is what we call national capability funding. And so that's basically our national science sort of role. And then the other half of our income is what we call external income. And most of that is still government funding. It's to do international projects or other special commission projects or things like that. So so typically people will work on a range of those projects. And so the way that people advance is largely up to them, but we provide the pathways for them to choose whether that's a more science dominant role. And we have some people here that have been running science experiments for 30 years here. Right, continuously, like in some radioactive waste assessment and things like that. So, and they're some of the top specialists in their field in that way. So, and there's others that, of course, move through more the management and the sort of the engagement with stakeholders and things like that. So, I think we certainly try to provide that sort of breadth, and I think that sort of and work with our staff to sort of encourage them to, I suppose, choose their own career and pathway that way.
Okay, thank you,
Nelia.
Okay, I have another question, but first I would like to ask a follow-up on Bob's question. First to Genevieve and then to Gavin. You mentioned that publication in peer-reviewed journals is an important component for scientists at CGS. And I think, as you mentioned, it's also important for USGS. One of the things that we've heard from USGS and that I've also experienced working with USGS co-authors is that their internal review and approval process for publications can be quite daunting. I'm curious how you handle this at the CGS and also at the BGS.
Well, at the Geological Survey of Canada, we are following a peer review process, even when a publication is published externally. We do have a process internally to expedite the peer review process, making sure that what is being published in other external publication is also aligned in terms of high quality and all the other measures. So we do have that. We have some challenges in terms of co-authoring, especially with especially with students who are conducting their PhD or research and other academic institution in terms of IP. It's really important for the students to keep their IP, but at the same time, when we work for the Crown in Canada, the IP invests with the Crown. So we have sometimes some minor challenges, but nothing that cannot be overcome. But the IP, we have an ongoing dialogue with the IP, and we have a team called Open Geoscience who is addressing the different scenarios of challenges that we may face with IP and co-authoring. I wouldn't say that that's a challenge given the volume of publication that we get every year. So it's not something that can be overcome. What we really don't like is when a scientist will publish outside of that official track. So we don't like that at all. We will call the scientist and say, okay, now you maybe you didn't know because you're new with the Geological Survey of Canada, but you have to use the protocol for publishing the information. What is being produced by the federal government must be published within the rules of IP and publication. But it happens sometimes from time to time. We have outliers.
And how long does your internal review process typically take?
It depends. So we do have a system for internal publication called GeoScan. So it's for the papers that will be published only on the federal platform, and we have another stream for publication that will be published elsewhere in other journals. And it depends of the complexity. Like, for instance, the large synthesis at the end of a cycle is a collection of many articles meant to be published in-house. Those ones will take more time because it's not only the content, but it's also all the assemblage or the publishing of the papers in the form of a synthesis. So those ones can take a few months. But when we publish for an external papers, it will go faster because a lot of the work will be done by the journals. So it's just about the content. So it depends what the type of publication, and it depends also on the pressure that we have to publish. The scientists, they are very well aware of our cycle for publication and the synthesis, like for this year in 2020, well, we're close to 2025. That will be the end of a cycle for the Targeted Geoscience Initiative. So all that they know very well in advance, we need your paper at this date, it needs to be reviewed at this date. So we have a schedule and a sequencing of action for the big publication that are the synthesis.
If I may add, there's also the less process involved open files that are very, very common at the GSC. Less of a process for that one and quicker.
Yeah, but they have to the open file, they have to follow the internal approval process.
Gavin.
Yeah, for BGS, I mean, a lot of our work is sort of more research style reports. So certainly staff are encouraged, if they want to put together, say, journal papers and so on, and that does have to go through an internal review process before it's submitted. But given certainly in my center, a lot of our work is very much research reports, and so we have, I think, like Genevieve was saying, we have a very strict timeline for review process, and certainly we line that up as part of any project. So at the moment, we're really close to finishing the next UK criticality assessment, and so the review process for that starts next week. And so then we've got a few weeks sort of locked in for that, and then it gets deal with all the comments and released late November. So I think that's the way we tend to work, because a lot of those reports are for external clients or various stakeholders or things like that. So we have a system in place to make sure that the peer review process is planned as pretty much from the start of a particular project. So I haven't gone through myself personally the actual process yet here at BGS for say journal papers or things like that, or more the academic style papers. But I know from colleagues that there is capacity within BGS. The staff can actually get time allocated to help them get those papers ready. And then people also, there's a peer review process for that before it gets submitted. So, and that normally doesn't have a sort of rigorous timeline around it, but certainly it's not expected to take months. It's expected to take weeks. So, and again, I think as sort of Genevieve was sort of alluding to as well, there's a trust that the journal also has a good peer review process. And so, so as long as we're comfortable with the overall science that we're submitting, and then it's sort of combined with the journal, we normally think that's a pretty good total activity in terms of peer review.
Great, thank you. Thanks to both of you. Now I'm going to get to the question I was actually going to ask. So in the US, most states have a state geological survey, which is typically very regionally focused. And those state geological surveys collaborate a lot with USGS. In some arenas very successfully, in others a little less so. I'm curious for CGS and BGS, are there regional surveys? And if so, how collaboration with those regional surveys looks to you?
We do have a lot of engagement with the provincial and territorial geological surveys in Canada. As part of a confederation, this is a very important audience for the GSC. So we have a committee called the National Geological Survey Committee, and we meet on a regular basis. Every week I meet with them because I'm the co-chair of this domestic engagement table. And so we talk about many aspects of the activities that we have in common. In order to shape the dialogue, we released 3 years ago a framework called the Pan-Canadian Geoscience Strategy. And we have 5 priorities, so we can organize our dialogue for those 5 priorities. It's not only about critical minerals, but of course the critical minerals are taking a really big portion of our time. Given the fact that it is a very important audience, because after all, they're in charge of the land claim, they're in charge of many aspects to mineral exploration in Canada. So what we put in place is a special funding contribution program for the critical minerals. So I am managing an envelope budget to support the different jurisdiction, provincial and territorial jurisdiction. And so we set the priorities at the Geological Survey of Canada, and they can ask for funding as part of contribution. Those are not grants, but really contribution. And it's really making a big difference. In fact, we don't have enough, the budget envelope is not big enough to support all the great initiatives that they are proposing to support the advancement of critical minerals research and de-risking mineral exploration in Canada. So yeah, we have a very positive relationship with the provincial and territorial surveys.
Thank you.
Yeah, BGS, I guess, is a bit different because we have the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, which is kind of our cousin, sibling, something like that. And so they're largely autonomous, but we consider them part of the broader BGS sort of family, so to speak. So we don't have any sort of provincial surveys. What we do have is a structure that we have chief geologists, and we have different centres. So we have a centre, or basically offices in Wales and up in Scotland, and obviously our main office here in the centre of the UK, here in England, in Nottingham. And so that's sort of the structure that we work. I guess that's sort of just the way that the UK is sort of set up, and so BGS operates in that way. So I think there's a lot of that. I suppose the way for us to think about things is also just the interaction with a lot of the international surveys that we collaborate with, and so that's probably more the analogy there. But and again, it's just working, whether it's with the data, whether it's the priorities, all sorts of things, and making sure we work out what's needed and work accordingly. The other thing that I think is probably quite important as well is because we have the chief geologist both for Wales and England and also Scotland. That's the way that a lot of that sort of cooperation about what is done, and that's sort of filtered through our national capacity funding. So a lot of that, I suppose, is addressed that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Karen?
Yes, thanks very much. This has been really interesting, and it's so nice to talk to you all. I'm following on from Nelia's question in a way about collaborations in both of the surveys. And you both have entirely different countries and resource concerns and so forth, and size and scale, of course. But in terms of collaborating across with other federal agencies, it's an issue with the USGS particularly because there's so many different groups involved with critical minerals, but also energy, mining, processing, process development, all of these things. So my question really is, within your surveys, are you, is it kind of a free flow or are there barriers between minerals, energy, mining, processing, process development, innovation, so forth? Are those different silos, or are you treating them all together? And then secondly, how to reach across to other federal agencies to partner, collaborate, work on research projects? Is it individually? Is it top-down management? And maybe if you could just discuss collaborations across the government agencies. Yeah, thanks.
I'll go first. I think that there's various ways we do that. Some of our work is external funding, as I was describing, and that's from other government agencies. And so whether that's for example, the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero here, we have other work that's funded through the Environment Agency. And so sometimes that can be work around groundwater, can be other aspects. So some of our work, if you're looking at the southwest of England, around Cornwall, for example, you're not just looking at the potential for lithium, you've also got existing coal and clay sector. But there you're talking about geothermal. And so you've got that interaction of the geothermal side and then the brines that come from there, which are quite rich in lithium as well. So there's intersections there that mean sometimes we can't deal with it in a silo. So our challenge area that we have, that I'm based within, is what we call decarbonisation and resource management. And so that includes things like carbon capture and storage. It includes geothermal. It includes minerals. And so depending on the nature of the project, will interact in various ways. So because sometimes if you're looking at some of the projects, for example, down in Cornwall, they're interconnected, and you can't do one without the other. And so we'll need the different sort of different experts from to get involved on things. So for us, working at that collaboration is project by project. There's some services that we provide that around either the groundwater side or other things to other agencies. So that sort of a very formal collaboration, and some of that's been going on for many years. So I think there's certainly there's some good examples there, but I think that it's understanding those challenges. And so sometimes, some of our job is to actually, I suppose, educate some of the different arms of government so they can understand how they can achieve what they need to. We don't get involved with the research side around processing. Typically, that's not part of our role or remit. But sometimes there are projects that we do get involved with from a research point of view that look at supply chains and circular economy. So, and then some of the more process-based research around either extraction or things like that, that's where whether it's universities or other partners, they'll be involved in doing that type of work. So, but one of the key themes that we keep trying to make sure is clear is that a lot of the challenges we face and the solutions we need to be implementing all involve the subsurface. Whether it's water, whether it's energy, whether it's say waste storage. We also have the radioactive waste management team in here as well. So all of those are integrated, and so it's so across all of the different agencies. So hopefully that helps.
In Canada, the concept of critical minerals, the narrative is really under the natural resources promotion and unlocking the capacity for accessing those resources. I'm under the impression that in the USA, the narrative is not only promoting natural resources, it's also a major narrative for national security and defense. So therefore, the interaction with other federal department is also very different. Just in terms of scale, it's a much smaller federal community in Canada than it is in the States, right? And Ottawa, it's a very small capital city. We all know each other. It's a very small city. I know my neighbors, and I know what's going on downtown. I live downtown, so like it's not just like the ease of interaction. I don't think it's the same complication or same size as the United States. It's very far from that, the same size. But in order to organize the governance, our department and our Natural Resources Canada, organize a critical mineral center of expertise. So whoever has a question or would like to be in touch with another department, we can go through this, they call it CMCE, a center of expertise, and we can certainly connect with each other. So yes, of course, I can connect with the other departments. Yesterday it was the innovation department. I said we also have a lot of interaction with Parks Canada, given the fact that just like United States, Canada, and Geoscience Australia and many other nations, we have our target for protected areas. So Parks Canada right now is in the concept of organizing the new polygon for protected area. They will consult the Geological Survey of Canada, but it's very easy because we all know each other. And after more than 20 years as federal civil servant, we have a really good network. So I don't think that's that complicated. And in terms of the various pillars of the strategy for critical mineral strategy, the geoscience is only one, and I have to admit, small pillar. It's not the main pillar of the strategy. And if we want to talk to Canmet Mining, this is our sister organization. They're just across the street. And if I look at the window here, I will see them. They came with us at our field trip, our annual field trip. So this is like, the interaction is really like much easier, I think. But I think it's because it's the scale of the network. It's never as complex as it is in the US.
Okay, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I just added the link to the Canadian critical mineral strategy, and as Genevieve said, we have one piece of that puzzle, and the overall investment a couple of years ago of almost $4 billion. It was divided amongst NRCan took a big piece, National Research Council took a piece for other R&D and commercialization aspects. and the Department of Science, Innovation Science, ISED, Genevieve, help me out. They got a piece as well, especially for the midstream, for opportunities for the private sector to obtain funding. I said, what is it? Innovation Science. Anyway, I'll get it to you guys.
This is a great opportunity for me to thank James for all the links that he's putting into the chat. We will have a lot of great things to follow up on. Really appreciate that. Could you just explain about this Critical Minerals Center of Expertise? Who runs that? Who stands that up? How did that get established?
Yeah, inside the Natural Resources Canada, we have various sectors like forestry or strategic policy and energy sector. So one of the sector and the biggest sector is lands and minerals. So that center of expertise is under that so-called sector, lands and minerals. So we have a Director General, Claudine Paget, who's in charge of leading this center of expertise and connecting all the pieces and also doing the reporting.
Okay, that helps a lot. Karen, did you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just had a further question about interactions amongst federal agencies and so forth. Are you in any way, the USGS appears to be a bit at the whim of government, and a liberal government or a conservative government comes in, things, funding changes and things, it might be difficult to plan across multiple years. In your particular situations, do you have a long-term strategy, or is it more dependent on what the government asks of you in the short term?
Yeah, I guess for BGS, there can certainly be changes in project emphasis. Sometimes one of the challenges I guess we face is that there's always a long-term, very gradual decline in our national capability funding. And so that does really stretch us for being able to continue to deliver a lot of the national geoscience that we do. And so part of our response to that also is to sort of try and boost our external income. So a lot of the additional work that we can do, whether that's with other government agencies or especially a lot of the international focus. And so that's in some ways we don't necessarily see it as one side of politics or the other. I think it's just a general issue around understanding, not just the cost of a survey, but the value that it generates. And I think that's the sort of a conversation that is not always easy to get people to sort of engage with and understand, because I think it's people like to focus on the simple things, which is how much stuff costs, rather than actually the value. And the value is again, it's a loaded term, but I think as Geoscience Australia has certainly demonstrated, there are various ways to actually measure that quantitatively, and be able to show that success and the I suppose the great value that surveys do provide. So yeah, I think that's hopefully helps anyway.
James, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'd like to add to that in the sense of fiscal restraint. So we're in the current context, we have our programs and related budgets. Naturally, Canada, the size that it is, our field work is very expensive. So we have a real challenge as being part of a line department at Natural Resources Canada to achieve our program objectives, and some of the programs are heavily reliant on field work, and at the same time we're getting the message from the very top to cut budgets year over year. Travel is the most obvious thing to cut, especially with where it ties to public sentiment. So that's on the one hand, and the other question was about the political change. The GSC traditionally has been very, very good at maintaining their programs, whether it's a liberal or a conservative government. We've been very good at going to the government and asking for funding. decades and decades through the current process of going to the cabinet to propose new programs given government priorities, and also going to the bank, as it were. We once we get something announced in a budget, in a federal budget, then we're very successful in going to Treasury Board to obtain the funding for the programs.
I just want to complement with we do not have any assumption that the program for critical minerals will be renewed at the end of this cycle, which will be in 2027. We cannot say, yes, it's going to be renewed. We have to prove that we are successful. So we will certainly go for a next round of renewal, and we're working on that right now, but we have no guarantee that it's going to be renewed. So it's keeping us on our toes, and we want to really deliver the science excellence that is expected by our nation.
How do you make that case? That's such a tricky thing.
Yeah, can I just come in quickly there, Ken? I'll come back to that. I think another point I think it's really worth highlighting here as well is that part of the way of making sure you demonstrate success is to make sure you've got that long-term and objective, you're independent, and there is that quality of the science there. And I think, as I was saying, I was sort of alluding to that, I guess, when you're talking about value. But that way, when you are, getting seeking funding renewal or an increase in funding or special project funding, then you're not seen as sort of trying to play one side off against the other. You're seen as just being good scientists doing good work that's in the national interest. And so I think that's often a really important part of it as well. I think I just answered your extra little point there as well, Carol. So hopefully.
Yes, that was great. Thank you very much. Let's turn to Cecilia.
Hi, I have 2 questions. One is just following up on Gavin's previous comments. I just wanted to know how you mentioned that you not only just track the impact on mineral resources, but also groundwater and energy. Can you give us some examples about how you track the impact, the work that you did on those sectors? But my main question for everyone is related to mine waste. So the USGS is now embarking on they recognize that mine waste is it's a source of critical minerals, and so they're embarking on a program to inventory and to do a lot of research about them. Do you have similar programs in Canada or in Great Britain that and can you share like how you are approaching mine waste, if at all? Thank you.
Yeah, my whole career started in mine waste and it's still going. And so I could talk about that forever. I mean, I built the mine waste atlas with GA and the whole data set that goes with that. But so I think we can't quite do the same thing here easily in the UK. The era of mining is much older, and so the data and the records are just not as extensive in the same way that I've been able to build that, say, for Australia. But I think there's certainly opportunities. Now, the challenges here is that you've got areas that are now national parks, you've got communities. So the issues here are very, very different to, I suppose, approaching mine waste as you would in Australia. And there's similar issues in the US and so on as well, where you've got, whether it's environmental impact, acid mine drainage, tailings dam stability, erosion, biodiversity, all of these types of things that then intersect. In some parts of America, there's certainly clear intersections with different Native American or Indian interests as well, and so on. So there's all sorts of different other factors socially that have to be thought about. But it still starts with making sure it's the same geoscience. It's some of the same issues. It's mineralogical characterization. It's looking at the risk assessment, understanding the environmental geochemistry, all of these types of things. So making sure you've got good baseline surveys, or looking at some of the impact assessment, where you look at upstream, downstream type approaches, or analogous areas, so natural analogs, things like that. So there's all that type of stuff there. But again, if we're looking at some of the potential, is looking at not only just sort of what the numbers are, like what the data, the concentrations are, and sort of the tons and grade, as some might say, But again, going to that value, and when you're looking at the value for the UK, sometimes it's actually not just the cost of actually the extraction or the the value of the metals, but it's also thinking about some of the remediation strategies and thinking about actually when you're looking at the whether it's improved land use capacity, reducing environmental liability, or other factors, then there's a broader picture there that you can bring into, I suppose, is what is a more economic analysis as opposed to just a financial analysis. But you still got to get the same things that we have to do for a mining project, such as getting in mineralogy, your geometallurgy, and all of these types of things, your environmental assessment. It's all exactly the same for mine waste. It's just that you're starting with mine waste as opposed to a mineral deposit, I guess. So I think, and so some of that is, there's certainly some sites in the UK that might be perspective in that way, but so much of the mine waste here is really, it's from an older era, and so the level of data and other things is much harder. But also that means the sites are typically much smaller as well, so that we don't have some of the big sites that exist, say in Australia, or certainly some of the big ones in the US that are, that need attention, or as there would be in Canada as well. So I think yeah, that's certainly, I suppose, some of the mine waste issues. Yep.
Thank you. How is it in Canada?
I'll start. Yeah, so part of it's not in the purview of the GSC necessarily. It's more related to CanMet mining, where they have a very similar program related to mine waste. How you described it, to do a mine waste inventory. So they have it from their context of what's the program called? It's mining value from waste. If you Google that term, mining value from waste, and you'll find the link to CanMet mining's activities. However, there is an aspect of our critical minerals geoscience and data program that does have more of the understanding the geological process of mine waste. So, sure, you could have an inventory of the potential for resources from mine waste, but is it economically viable? What are the relationships between what you're finding in these brines and so on? That's where part of our funding in our geoscience, we call it just CMGD, our critical minerals program. That's a small part of our funding is devoted to that, solving that question.
And so what exactly are you doing within that?
Well, that's for the scientist to answer. But please feel free to follow up with a question, and I can get some examples for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Why don't we turn to Rod?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask about stakeholders, interested parties. Who's the audience for the work that you do, and specifically, how has that changed over time, and how do you balance competing audiences? So Gavin made a comment about an hour ago that the professionals get to choose whether they want to be more in the stakeholder engagement, externally focused information provision track or the research track. But I would think organizationally, there have to be some either targets or constraints imposed by the outside. And as I hear the conversation, it seems to me there are at least four. I would classify the audiences or stakeholders that I've heard into four categories. Historically and traditionally, I think in all three organizations, the research community and kind of the academic audience, the public, there's that has been an important audience. So let's call that academic. There's a second audience that I would classify as industry, which maybe is less interested in the research findings and more interested in the basic geoscientific information that the surveys provide: geophysical surveys, geochemical surveys, basic geological maps. So that's a second audience. A third audience is other parts of government. In some sense, I think all three of these organizations, USGS, GSC, BGS, in some sense serve as in-house consultants to other parts of the federal government, and you respond to whatever questions they have. And then the fourth audience that I think is maybe not so prevalent or important for the USGS Mineral Resources Program, but is important for the BGS, and that is external clients, where you're basically responding to their requests and are under contract to deliver a report on something. And so the academic audience, in my simple view of the world, is primarily research focused. The industry audience is primarily information focused. And the rest of the government and the external clients really view the entity as a consultant for issues that are important for them. And I imagine all three of our organizations have some activities in all of those areas, but how has that changed over time, and how do you manage the competing demands?
With a lot of grace and effort, I guess, Rod, but it's it's not easy, and sometimes there is tension, and our role, I think I was sort of alluding to earlier, is to be independent, and I think that's how you get the credibility to the work you're doing, and you maintain that, and that's something that I think is really, really important. And so for us, it's making sure that, yeah, we are a data provider, and that data is used both by industry, but also other parts of government. It's also used by researchers. So the various ways that a lot of the data and information that we are the custodians of is very important. So it's a matter of, I guess, just, sometimes it's a project by project sort of basis. We put a lot of effort into making sure we do manage the quality of our work and reputational risks. And so some of the decisions we take, we don't take lightly, because we have to make sure we're being very mindful of different stakeholders. And so sometimes there is competition, even in government. Sometimes there's different parts of government have different objectives, and so and sometimes working with that and working out how you can find that middle ground to help solve the problems and so on, whether it's a policy problem or other things. So I think it's something we're always very mindful of, and I guess it's always done on a project by project basis, but within that broader framework of making sure that we are independent, we are objective, and that's the great value proposition that certainly we see ourselves as BGS, and I think that's sort of probably similar with GSC and GA and many others as well. But I'll handball to GSC so that they can talk for themselves too.
Could I just interject a quick point here? We heard from Geoscience Australia yesterday, and I think we heard from the USGS previously, that the relative roles of information provision and fundamental research, those relative roles have changed over time. That 30 or 40 years ago, it was really, the activities were really anchored around academic-like research, single investigators going out to study a particular ore deposit district. And basic information, while important, was relatively less important, whereas today, certainly from Geoscience Australia's perspective, they said about 10 years ago, the information became the driving force behind their activities. And so, Gavin, I realize you haven't been at BGS long enough to probably have a good idea about that, but Genevieve and James, as you think about the Canadian situation.
Yes, so for the Canadian situation, I really appreciate your 4 buckets of type of key stakeholders. In Canada, I would add one super important key stakeholders are the Indigenous groups. So this is not something marginal. This is major. and it's a very important component of the critical mineral strategy, the engagement with indigenous group, and it does have a significant impact on our capacity to deliver our science agenda. And another one that is really important is the fact that critical minerals, in the end, this is profoundly an international file. So the international stakeholders and the relationship with other nations like USGS or many others is becoming a very important cognitive driver for the GSC. So this is, in the past, we always been having international relationship, MOU, but now it's officially part of our official mandate, for which we will be audited by the Treasury Board Secretariat for the renewal of our funds, because critical minerals, it's an international file after all. So yes, it's evolving, and yes, even though I mentioned that the main communication piece is the research papers being published, so this is by far the main way to communicate the results to the key stakeholders. We are evolving, and we've been told many times by various program assessment that we have to evolve. We cannot just rely on our publishing regimen or volume of publication. We have to change the way we are engaging with our stakeholders. So for that particular front, we are changing that, and we are sending our scientists to various local events so we can inform the local stakeholders and the mining industry in particular how to access the data, what we can do with the data, the type of machine learning we can do with the data, the type of question they can ask the data. So the data is becoming the narrative, and the reaching the various stakeholders where they are through open houses or conference or PDAC. We always have a lot of our scientists who will provide workshop on how to make the best of the data that we're providing. Not only the geoscience being delivered, but the data, the raw data is really becoming a driver. We have soon a dry run of that type of new approach in November at the Geological Survey of Canada, because we really want to change the driver. What I noticed over the past several years at the Geological Survey of Canada, who's using our papers? Yes, the academic are using our papers, but in the mining industry, it's the majors who are using our papers the most. The majors, they have the capacity to have PhD, a geoscientist who can read the paper and make sense and inform the private company what to do with this new information. But we have a gap when we are trying or talking to the more emerging mining companies. It's difficult for them to not just access. They can access our geoscience, but what does that mean? What's the impact on them? How they can use this information? So if it's a self-assessment, we have to improve our capacity for the emerging new mining company, and that way to do that is really by informing that kind of audience how to access the data and what we can do with the data. And I just want to conclude with the international engagement. The reason why it's so precious in Canada to collaborate with USGS and many other nations in the world right now, it's because we are changing the analytics with AI and deep learning. And those new methodology for us for prospectivity modeling are extremely data hungry. So even though we have a lot of terabytes of information and data in Canada and from our various other jurisdictions, it's never going to be sufficient if you want to win the race and inform our audience faster than China, faster than all the other nations. We have to work together for artificial intelligence. This is not something like marginal. It's becoming critical for the capacity to develop our prospectivity modeling. So the international stakeholders are are a key cognitive driver right now for our capacity to find new deposits of critical minerals. We cannot just rely on the information that we have.
Thank you very much for that. And Rod, did you want to follow up some more?
No, that was great. Thank you very much.
I suspect that both Rod and I are thinking that time has been flying here, and we really have gotten so much out of this conversation. And maybe this is a good time talking about how things are evolving to ask each of you if you could comment on what is probably one of the harder parts of our charge as a committee, and that is to figure out how the USGS should evolve. You were talking about evolving. How should the USGS evolve to meet future needs? How do you in your entities keep your eye on what's happening next, and how do you stand up your programs to make sure that they are responsive to the future? What kind of advice would you have for our committee and for the USGS in how to do this? I think we've been getting a few ideas just in your last statements, but maybe we could take a final round and have you comment on how we should adapt for the future.
Do you want to go first, David? Or I can go first.
Yeah, you go first. It's okay. I'm still thinking. You go first.
Okay. So a couple of points for the future, addressing the future. We have to address challenges that are complex, not what we think that is easy win. It's a natural tendency. We want to address what would be a quick win or what will be easy. I think what we have to do is addressing what will be complex and what will be a game changer for our capacity to produce faster and our capacity to deliver faster to find new mineral deposits of critical minerals and attracting investment. So one thing that I witness right now with our capacity of prospectivity modeling using artificial intelligence is the fact that the cost for AI testing is increasing. Even though we have different methodology to reduce the cost, it will become really expensive to do all our testing. And it's not just something special for geological surveys. It's not something special for geoscience. It's like that everywhere in the world. So we have to address the concept of the computing capacity to conduct our science. So the computing capacity will become a real issue because as a nation, we certainly don't have enough capacity for computing. Therefore, we have to look at other ways to conduct our business. One way that we're doing right now is using the different approach for quantum computing. And we're very fortunate in geoscience. The geoscience can use the quantum computing, but also the quantum sensors in airborne geophysics. So this is one approach that is not something marginal or we can ignore it or we can say somebody else will take care of that. This is something for federal government to address. So this is one important challenge, the technical challenge, and addressing not what we know already, but what we don't know. In terms of critical minerals, one thing that is a real challenge is that this list is constantly evolving. It's an evergreen list. So we can say, okay, we have a list of, in Canada now we have, 33 critical minerals, but we have a short list of 6 critical minerals. Well, in 2-3 years, the race for the ultimate battery is not won. It will change. So the recipe for the best battery is not known yet. So the list of critical minerals will change. should we address again and again the lithium file when we know that lithium will probably be replaced in the battery? So we have to be on the edge of the technology and open this dialogue with, okay, the concept of criticality. I know some of you are experts in criticality. It's criticality for now, but what will be the situation, and how can we envision the situation in a couple of years? It's very hard to predict, and especially with the volatility of the market. And so we have to play a bigger role in predicting what will be the future for the technology that will be used in the battery. And finally, the engagement with various stakeholders. We just mentioned a couple of pieces of engagement, but the Indigenous engagement in Canada is very central. So by engaging more with them and contributing to the reconciliation agenda, it will really speed up the capacity to open up minds and conduct research and all aspects of that can be very useful to support the global supply chain. So the Indigenous one is really something to consider. And I don't know if your board is considering this aspect. I didn't hear anyone today asking question about Indigenous groups and how it's being considered by USGS or in the United States, but I think it's something very important, aligned with the ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So that would be my 3 pieces of advice for the future: addressing what we don't know, addressing the future ultimate fabrication, production of critical minerals, and engaging with Indigenous groups and also international stakeholders.
Yeah, I think for us, it's making sure we've got the various processes in place where we can get that external advice. So our board has, mining company executives on it. We've got different scientists and other organizations as well. So for us, and also for my own center, we have an advisory panel which has both a range of industry, research, and government people there, so they can sort of help us when we're thinking about the landscape of what we think is needed. We can always actually sort of work through that and say, yeah, actually, here's where we think some of the priorities should be in terms of our efforts now, and here's where we think some of the priorities should be in the future. And one of the a good example of that is actually quantum, because when we talk about criticality, we talk about often just elements, but when we're talking about quantum, it's not just the different elements that are involved, but it's a high purity and isotopic purity. And those are characteristics that criticality assessments really are not designed to assess at the moment. And you would approach that. I think the better way to approach that is actually thinking about technology deep dives rather than sort of more criticality assessment. But then I think as much as we're doing a criticality assessment at the moment, and there'll be a new UK list soon, it's the process of developing the list. It's actually the more important part, right? And I think that's where you're analysing the data, you're seeing what's going on, and some of the changes we can now see really clearly. Decarbonisation has meant that synthetic gypsum is no longer available in the UK. Clinker from fly ash is no longer available in the UK because we've now shut down all coal-fired power. So we're having to start importing more material and then actually mine more gypsum here. So some of those, it's just making sure that I think in terms of understanding the research and looking at the data and just having a good think, but getting that external advice, and that it's kind of like peer review of the organization, not necessarily just the science as well. So I think all of those things are really, really important. And so, and also just understanding the value that different experts have. So, so I'll, thanks, Richard. I'll see what we can share, but we should be able to share that. I suppose the terms of reference for our advisory panel, but so I think that's certainly the way we help understand the landscape of where we are now and what work is needed in the future. And so that's something that every year we have a planning process for doing work in our current year, and then thinking about planning for work into the future as well. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's very helpful, both of you. James, would you like to weigh in?
I'd only add, as was the focus of our critical minerals program, is talent rejuvenation. And an added aspect of that is talent retention. So, are we attracting the best, and are we compensating them accordingly, right? So it's something we really have to keep an eye on.
Very good point. Well, I just, on behalf of the committee, can't thank the three of you enough. This has been so helpful for us. And again, thank you for all the extra information you've sent us in the chat as well. We are happy to have all that. And on behalf of the entire group, thank you again for helping us. It's very generous of you, and we really appreciate it.